I don't know if this will be particularly interesting to people or not. I've always assumed that it really wouldn't be, so that's why I've never really just done this before. But I'm just going to film my process. I'll talk a little bit when there's some sort of a technique or a sort of idea or trick that might be of interest, but it's not going to be a step-by-step or anything. There'll be very long sections of not talking. But if you're just interested in watching my process in real time, it might be relaxing if nothing else. So, let me know if this is interesting, and if it's not, that's okay, because I just do this anyway. This is just my life. So, I'm starting in intuitive painting here, and I personally have this weird nervousness around making things symmetrical. I don't know, it's uncomfortable to me artistically. So because of that, because it's out of my comfort zone, I'm intentionally starting off this piece as if I smooshed it together to try to force myself to play and, work with my art style in a different way so I don't fall into kind of automatic habits. And I'm also just using my fingers. I really enjoy that at this part because you'll see how the colors mix together in these interesting color gradations. So as long as you pick two colors that are close-ish to each other on the color wheel, you can mix them and you won't get any sort of kind of mucky, boring, beige color out of them. When I'm first starting, I often put paint directly onto the canvas. It's just easier than bothering to put it one place and then move it because I know I'm going to be using all of it anyway. And also with a larger canvas like this one is 18 by 18, because I'm working in one section, it gives other sections time to dry so that by the time I'm ready to work a new space on the canvas, it's already dry. So there's less waiting time between layers. I can make this easier for myself. So let's do that. This would also be called a wet on wet technique, where I'm using wet paint on wet paint, as opposed to when it dries and then it's wet on dry, I guess. It's those two real things. I feel like I'm making that up now, and that's not real. I think the lack of social interaction has decreased my ability to just speak clearly. So this is really fun as well, I can just pick up paint from other parts of my canvas and then move them to where I'm working. And then since there is that hint of green here, it pulls that green into there. So it just gives you a lot of really, you know, really fun color shifts that I think can make it look more intentional, or like if you don't feel like you're very good at painting, you can totally fake it like this. I mean, it's not faking it. You're fine. You're making art, whatever you do. So you don't need anybody's approval to make art, but if you wanted to feel like, you know, you were nailing it, you could do this and you're totally gonna look like you nail it. And I'm just using the flat side of my thumb there. And it's fun too, as you kind of move in one direction, sometimes excess paint will build up and give you those really clean lines. And you can work with those in interesting ways too. So. And to the truest extent of the word, right now all I'm doing is playing. I have no intention of what this will look like. I don't even know what I'm going to start working on after I do whatever I'm doing right here, other than that I'll mirror it. But really I'm just enjoying painting and letting it just be whatever it will be. Because especially these first layers, so much of them gets covered up anyway, that there's no need to stress about it or overthink what I'm doing. I can just let it very naturally be whatever it unfolds to be. So when you have a big kind of glob like that, that really allows you to go in here and kind of make layers with, that's not a very strong contrast between those two, so it's kind of hard to see what I'm talking about. So I'll explain it better later. There we go. So when I pull the white into the other colors and bring it back, all of that just occurs by just, you know, rubbing the paint in up here and then bringing it down. Rubbing the paint up a bunch, and this is what it'll look like. You know, I slid it up, and this, and then down. And you have these interesting little kind of, I don't know, grass or lines or, you know, whatever. This one is almost empty, so I'm pouring it right on the canvas. Normally I wouldn't necessarily open the lid like that, because then you really do lose control of the amount when you take the whole lid off. So this is a damp brush. Oh, that's what it is. It's the brush being dry or wet. There it is. And all I'm doing is just continuing to make larger concentric circles around this. And because there's the darker color already on the canvas here, and there's already lighter colors on the outside, if you just start and continue to work outward, that will stay pretty clean. and your outside will kind of pick up and move around that lighter color, and that automatically gives you a sense of depth. So that's kind of another easy way to work in shading without having to really think too much about shading. So this one is basically out. So it gets me those little circles as well as just a lot of paint on the canvas, or at least eventually I will move into making this asymmetrical. Eventually something will just kind of continue to sort of take on a mind of its own, and I'll just follow that where it goes. Ooh, too many paints. But eventually, it just starts to kind of go on its own. So anytime, let's use this one. So if you put down a thick amount like that, and then just kind of gently press it down, like I'm not even fully smooshing it to the canvas yet. And then, okay, so one thing you can do with something like this is build on it. So now I'm pressing all the way to the canvas. And if I want to take more of that color in, I just have to lift up a little bit and bring more in. And then here, again. If you want, you can sneak in a little more color. Bring it up here. And it's just building out thinner layers of that paint. But because you're bringing a lighter color onto a darker color like that, it's just going to inevitably give you a bit of a blend, because you're literally just mixing the paint on the canvas. But it can give you some really nice, again, kind of gradients if you want to play with the sense of space. Ooh, that looks like an eye now. Sounds kind of fun. Let's work with that. And that's how it works. Just eventually something kind of looks like something. And you can choose to play with that and work with it, or you can continue just playing and doing whatever feels right. And eventually I'm going to keep playing over this anyway, because I'm not particularly like attached to this. Like, it's just a part of my process. Neat to look at, but I don't have to, you know, worry about saving it or anything. Life lessons in art. So because these are so thick, they take longer to dry. But that also means I can bring in, oh, this one's also very, very nearly dead. So, woo! Also has a ball in it to help shake it around. All right, and then if we add some water, and those will kind of bleed around. And you can always help that along if you want. You can add, you can add water to certain places. I always love this part. I think it's so fun. I'm not going to do it now because it'd be very loud. But if you are working, you can tap it on your table and that'll help force some of it down as well. It's just very loud and disruptive if you're filming. So now with that, because it was still wet underneath and the fluid paint is so watery, it allows you to play on top of the previous colors in a new way. And you can I'm just rubbing, like pressing down all the way onto the canvas, and then that gives you these little ridges. And honestly, sometimes I just like watching how the color changes, so I just keep doing it. Like, I think painting has been a highly meditative process for me for years without me even realizing that that's the purpose it was serving in my life. And I think especially this kind of painting anyone can do, and it's gonna look good. Like, you know, it might be abstract, it might not be what you like, but it's gonna be good aesthetically. Like, you can't mess it up. So, you know, you may not like it, but, you know, by the art standards, it works. It's a painting. You made it. Good job. I don't know, it's very fun to realize you can't get it wrong. It's something very freeing in that. And as long as you're enjoying the process of creating it, the process is the point. It's about the journey, not the destination. And if you end up getting to a wonderful destination at the end of your painting, yay, you did it. So I like to always cover the full thing before I really like move on to any kind of fine work detail. mainly because it gives that initial layer a chance to dry some more. You might hear my neighbor dog, and that's okay because she's adorable and she's allowed to bark at stuff. It's her living her best life. So she'll stop soon, and I'm sorry if it bothers you, because she's a good girl and she gets to do her thing. So this is a much bigger example of that, just getting it wet and then letting the paint just go where it goes. So recently I've been, trying to make myself use different color palettes, because if you know my work at all, I tend to end up with a lot of teals and green, magenta, and those are pretty, but it gets it makes all my work look the same. And so, you know, like in life, you're supposed to try new things and new experiences. My water is very dirty right now, so that means you can also do fun things like this. If you want to just add a hint of color places, you can use your water to do that. I got excited to tell you that, and now I forgot what I was saying. So I'm forcing myself to work with new colors, which means things like orange, which is not a color I am particularly drawn to. It's nothing against orange. It's certainly not a value judgment. And anyone is allowed to like orange. It's just not really for me. But I think I can make it work in my work, and it's good for me to do things that are uncomfortable. So, welcome to the party, orange. And with things like this, again, I'm building up so much paint over here that I can just pick it up on my brush and bring it over to somewhere else. And for example, like here, if that blue hadn't been dry already, I wouldn't have put this down because I wanted it to stay kind of clean like that. So that's the difference of putting something wet. So like this was all wet and had the yellow, so I have all of these different colors in here. You'll notice here it's very clean. It's all the same, you know, the same pink. So that's what's going to give you that difference. I don't know if that's still a little bit. But because this is just a hint, kind of sticky, that's where it is in its dryness. Not a very complimentary term, I suppose. When I'm doing this, I'm just globbing water on. It's fun. It can just give you some subtle range of color in there based on where the lines and stuff are of the brush stroke. Of the brush strokes. I'm just not used to talking. So all of this, yeah, so this is just, again, a little bit sticky dry. And so if I bring in a bit of that cream color, it'll still blend with it. So notice I didn't get just pure cream. If this were dry and I put the cream on it, it would be solid. So that's how you just kind of can figure out a little bit of what to expect as far as the reaction of what your paint will do and how your paint will, you know, react in different situations. All right. This is kind of fun just here. I think I might call it a day on this one for a little bit and then maybe revisit it once all of this is dry. But if you wanted, I think, and this, if you had created this and this was your first layer and you were like, hey, this is awesome, I'm just gonna leave it here. You do that. Follow your heart. If you're at like about this stage and you hate it, you're like, this is awful, I don't like it, I want to just paint it clean, don't do that, don't do that. Because we can cover all of this as we keep going, and all of this gives you such interesting little bits and shapes to play with. Like I said, I don't even know if this eye is going to stay, you know, through to the end, who knows. But all of this gives you more dimensionality to play off of and texture, and I think having something to work with is so much more fun and inspiring than starting with a plain white canvas. So when you're playing, let yourself play. Did you enjoy it? Are you enjoying the process? Because that's the point. All right, so I guess let's go this way. All right. Now I want to see it the other way. What do you think? I don't know. It's also kind of like a fish. That's sort of fun. But yeah, so if that was enjoyable to you at all, let me know, because this is just what I do, except I'm explaining it a little bit to someone. So yeah, let me know if you enjoy this, and take care of yourself. The world is hard, be nice to yourself. Okay, bye friends. Welcome back, friends. We're going to start layer 2. Before we do that though, I wanted to just kind of show you a close-up of some of these interesting color variations that we got. Yes, we're a team. You were here for it. Unless you didn't watch that one, in which case, you weren't here for it. So then this isn't yours. All right, like that's so fun to me. Okay. So at this point as well is when I would start looking for anything that might kind of appear. So it's sort of like when you're a kid and you look at the clouds, or when you see a face in tree bark or something like that. That's kind of what we're doing here. So like I said, this seems like it could maybe be a fish or an eye. There's also this fun thing where at the right angle, this looks like a nose and a mouth and then eyes. It's upside down, but it's kind of another little thing there. Sometimes if you squint your eyes as well, that will kind of blur things together in an interesting way that can also maybe inspire you or help you see things from a different angle to find something interesting. All of this is completely dry. Whatever I add now isn't going to really mix with any of the colors that are down here. We're on our first layer. It was all about mixing with those. Just to be fun, I'm going to let go of the eye and continue painting and just see what it brings me. I think it's important to demonstrate that, you know, you can certainly get attached to things and develop them out, but also just because you kind of notice something in a piece, it doesn't mean that you have to follow that through. You can always just keep playing. And this is a color that I rarely use because it's so vibrant that it feels overwhelming to me. Even as colorful as my work can get, this feels too much. So I'm blending it with this cream, and you can see it helps tone it down a little bit so it's not quite as like in your face royal blue. And maybe it's because this is like my high school color. This is like vibrant blue that I'm just kind of like, oh, that's okay. I don't need that everywhere. I've seen it enough. We were the blue ponies, which is not a very menacing animal. All right. So again, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just playing, and I'm just letting these colors blend together in interesting ways that are fun, and you know, we'll just see where it goes. So I sort of like this, so I'm just kind of making a little box around it, but you can make any shape around it. I'm just doing that solely so that I keep a little bit of it for now, because I do enjoy it. That green and those magentas are fun together. So that's one way you can kind of save bits that you like. And I'm sure you've picked up on this by now, but the more that you mix two colors on the canvas, the more they'll eventually blend into, you know, the median color of the two of them together, as opposed to being that, you know, very contrast in color. So I'm bringing in the palette knife here. And I really enjoy it for the different textures you can get with it. And whenever you make a row like that, if you want to go over it with like a new layer, that also gives you this automatic dimensionality to your piece. Even if you don't know what necessarily this is or what it would be, it's all just patterns, fun marks. That's all we're doing. I'm enjoying this variation of blue, that the more teal and then the more kind of purpley blue are creating together. I think that's very pretty. Oh, it matches my gloves. Well, that's fun. Alright. Put some of this over here just because I have it. So we'll just get that off my fingers there. The other fun thing about this is you can just really use it as or view it as just trying to use up your paint that you've made. So if you're really not sure where you're going or whatever, just, put out a little bit of paint and then use it all up. And once you've used it all, step back and take a look at where you are and see how you feel about that without trying to think too much about how you're applying it to the canvas. Eventually, if you kind of play with this kind of painting long enough, you'll find that you just get into a flow of it. And it's this very kind of beautiful, relaxed, you're enjoying whatever you're doing at the moment without really worrying about, what everything is going to be. You're just very focused in the now. I'm working with fairly soft-bodied paints today, so they're not as liquidy, but if I make my brush super damp, then they just become liquidy because they don't have a choice. And if you see anything, as this is going, please feel free to tell me in the comments. I love to know what other people see because it's just so interesting how different people's eyes are drawn to different things, and we're all pulling from different reference points of what what our the patterns that our minds make to what sort of imagery is expected. Like, I always tend to find a lot of birds in my art. The whole point of painting is you, not the painting. So you should be enjoying the process. That's not to say that there might be parts where you want something to look a certain way and it's kind of challenging. Like, that's cool. Enjoy the challenge of it for sure. But you should never, you should never get so invested that the value that a painting provides is solely focused on its end product. So you should be enjoying it and relaxed enough in just the paint playing that that's the fun. I compare it to like golf or guitar, where so many people do those and they're not planning on being a professional golfer or a professional musician. They just do it for fun, and maybe they're not even particularly good, but they're still just it's relaxing to them, it's fun, or they just it's creatively or physically fulfilling in some way. And for some reason, we act like, yeah, but if you want to paint, you have to be like good at it to paint. And first of all, so many adults haven't painted in a really long time. So, like, you haven't painted in a really long time, you're probably not going to be phenomenal. And that's okay. Nobody expects that of you. Um, you should do it because you're enjoying, getting your feelings out, or enjoying the meditative quality of it, or, the playful creativity that it kind of inspires in you. And if eventually you get to a point where, you know, um, this sounds arrogant and I don't mean it that way. I mean this as in I've spent over 20 years. I mean, my whole life I've been making art, but, focusing professionally on painting for, 20 years. So I'm not being conceited when I say that I'm lucky that I'm at the point now where I feel self-assured and that whatever I'm painting, by the time I get to the end, I can make it something that is visually fun and visually finished and complete and like a whole work of art, where it is something on its own. But even so, the whole process for me is only about painting. It's about doing it. And I don't I don't care what the end thing is. And because of that, I've I've surprised myself in such beautiful and unusual ways, because I was willing to just trust that it'll be what it'll be, and I'm good enough at this point that I'll be able to make it something I like. But that's been years and years, and I think if you just gentle with yourself and respect the fact that you're just getting started, you'll make something amazing. And I think it helps a lot if you just imagine somebody else did it. We tend to be able to appreciate other people's, um, you know, bravery of trying and delving into creativity a lot more compassionately than we do to ourselves. So, you know, abstract is always something. Right. Let's bring in some more of this green here. And it's looking at it from different angles, because sometimes, something that looked like, one thing looks different. Or stepping back from it entirely, like leaning it up against a wall, and then stepping to the other side of the room, or stepping to the other side of the room and squinting your eyes, and that'll kind of show you some different stuff too. I definitely don't have what I would consider a top or bottom yet, but I'm kind of enjoying this angle or this position right now. I'm not sure if that matters and it'll end up as anything, but it's kind of what I'm feeling. So I'm using a high flow acrylic here, and that's what I'm able to get these really delicate lines with. This one's almost empty, so I added water and I'm just taking it out of it. But I really recommend this. If you want to do fine line work, this is going to be so much easier for you than a soft body, because you're just not starting with as thick of a medium. And you'll see the difference here where this is wet and this is dry. So you get much cleaner lines when you're going on something that's already dry than when it's already wet. Little drip buddy. It's kind of fun. And if I want to bring back some of what was underneath there, because the top layer is still wet, I can then come in, get it really wet, and kind of pick it off like that. And if you use paper towel, it'll also give you those interesting textural elements as well, which can be fun. You can also use the pressure of the nozzle to actually kind of like sort of pressure wash it, I guess. And that will also clear off some of that for you. And then if you go back in and kind of dampen it off and wipe, you can bring back some of that stuff. So it's all just whatever you feel like doing with it, you know, and there'll be parts that like every piece that I make has kind of an ugly stage where things just kind of look wrong and wonky and, you know, it just doesn't feel right or fit quite with, you know, where I feel like it should be going. And when that happens, I just step away for a little bit. And sometimes that little bit is an evening. And sometimes that little bit is, oh my gosh, I think one was like 3-4 years that I stepped away. But then eventually I do finish and it's always awesome. Like it always turns out great. I just have to let myself step away and release my expectations and just, you know, relax into the process again and just refocus on enjoying it. Because usually when I get too caught up in what I think it should be, or, you know, something like that, I kind of hold myself back. So I've learned to just, you know, step back, relax, and then revisit it. All right, I think we might be close to a stopping point for this second layer. And then I'll let this dry. And we will come back again. And if if you're painting along, if you're doing something similar with me on your own, awesome. I would love to see how that looks. That's very exciting to me. But also, if you're painting and you get to a point like this and you think this is it, I really enjoy it, I think it's great, I'm going to leave it, then just leave it. But don't leave a painting because you're scared of wrecking it. You should never be scared of your art. You should always, that was the point I guess I was trying to make. You should never be afraid of your art. Your art is for you. It's something that flows out of you. So you don't have to be afraid of wrecking it because you're the one who decides what it is anyway. And if you change it, then it was supposed to be changed because you're the creator. So, you just have to learn to trust yourself. There we go. So there's our layer 2. Thank you, friends, and take care of yourselves. It's a weird world, so be nice to yourself. Welcome back, friends. So this is layer 2 complete. We're going to start layer 3. This piece is 18 by 18 inches. That's the size of canvas that we are working with. And yeah, let's see what we want to do. Throw in a little bit of this one. Should give me some of that. And a little bit of... If it's intimidating to you to put paint directly on the canvas, I understand entirely. I enjoy it because it kind of forces me to use what's there, and it kind of creates a problem to solve. I have this much paint, what am I going to do with it? Where will I put it? But if that feels a little overwhelming or just kind of, too much commitment for you, that's cool. You can always put it on your palette and then bring it over in a way that feels a little more in line with your comfort of working. I've just been doing this a really long time, so I don't, the same things that might make you nervous if you just are starting aren't really things that necessarily make me nervous. So I'm just trying to be cognizant of what that might be in your case if you're starting out. So this teal here is very translucent. So if I don't mix it with something like this cream yellow color here to make it a little more opaque, it's very see-through. So that's partially why I'm mixing it with this friend. This green that I put down is a high flow liquid. So as you'll see, it's very runny. Where these other ones are soft body paints, so they're really thick and they're not going to give you that automatic dripping unless you add in a high flow and mix it with it, or mix it in with water. If you add enough water and kind of brush it out, that will also give you that liquidy texture. So this is usually the layer, or starting at this layer, where if something kind of starts to stand out to me and look like something, I would start to fill it in or kind of build out whatever I'm sort of noticing. I don't see anything yet, but maybe, maybe you do. Kind of like looking at the clouds when you're a kid. So if you see anything, let me know. This kind of reminds me of a snail shell or like a wave here, but that's about it. Let's bring in some white. Actually, this white that I'm bringing in is a fluid, so it's not super runny, but it's softer than these kind of paints. And as always, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just painting, just making shapes and kind of filling things out, and honestly just trying not to think too much about what I'm doing, which can kind of feel counterintuitive in a way to try to turn off your brain to do something. But I think the more you just let go and relax and just enjoy what you're doing, the better it turns out in my experience. The less pressure that I put on myself and less stress of having it need to be something or need to, um, go a certain direction or have some sort of concept of success that I'm working towards. When I let all of that go, you're left with just painting and the freedom of that. Okay. Put in a little bit of fine line work. And then I think that'll probably be around the stopping point for layer 3 here. So again, this is it's almost empty tube. And so I just filled it with some of my water to just reinvigorate the kind of whatever dregs of paint are left at the bottom. I'm using this really long brush, really long tip brush, because it lets you make, as long as it's wet enough, it has enough pigment on it, you can do these very fun, dainty lines that I'm a big fan of. They're going to be easier on dry canvas because it's wet. The paint interacts with it more, so it kind of takes more off the brush and isn't quite as clean as when you go on the dry surface like this. But any of these fluid acrylics, high flow fluid acrylics, I love them because they will definitely help you get these really just very intricate and delicate brush strokes. So if that's something you enjoy and you've had trouble getting that to work for you in acrylic painting, it's probably because you're using a really thick body paint. And it's still possible with a thick body paint. It's just a lot trickier because you have to add enough water and matte medium to get it to that consistency, where this color or this style of paint is already at that consistency. So it's less challenging to do it this way. Ooh, I'm tripping color. Right, so I'm not sure what direction I'm going to want this to go. So, I don't know, maybe you see something going on here. There's certainly some interesting angles and shapes happening. I don't quite see anything yet, but that certainly does not mean that there isn't anything to be seen. So if you see something, let me know. I'm very curious. It's always fun to see how other people's, imagination connects things, or how their eyes, pull from reference images that are different than, we all pull from a whole different catalog of visuals and experiences and art that we've absorbed over our lives and whatnot. Here we go. All right, so that is our layer 3. Thank you, friends, and I'm excited to see where this goes. Welcome back. So we're playing again on this piece. This is our layer 4 that we're starting. And I think I'm kind of seeing a jellyfish. It would be upside down in this position, but I'm kind of seeing it right here. So I'm just going to fill that in and give you an idea of how I just kind of see what's there and then try to build around it. I have a really bright light coming in from my window I'm trying to block, but if you see that contrast there, it's just the lighting from the window and not anything with paint. I'm using matte medium to just spread out the color that I already put on the canvas. By doing that, it gives me this sort of gradation in translucency, where it's more opaque in some places, a little more translucent in others. I think that adds just a nice variation, just a nice variation in color for the background. This brush is very fun because it has these kind of intermittent long and short bristles, and because of that you can get these really thin, sorry, I'm trying to get the right level of paint and water on here. You can get these fun parallel thin lines, which I just love. And depending on how wet the paint is that you're mixing here, like this black is pretty damp, where over here it's a little drier. So for the drier parts, if I want to go in again and add a darker color, it isn't going to blend as much. But over here, if I tried that, it would still really bleed out into each other, which is just fine. The trick is knowing that, so then you can use that however you want, like with a high contrast kind of thing. So then they'll bleed together and gradiate more. I sort of like this part of the background there, so I'm just kind of removing bits and pieces of this to allow it to kind of transition from something very formed back into what the background is. So here I'm doing a lot of vertical lines like this because it will give it a somewhat consistent look in the background in a way that it's maybe just sort of implied underwater shapes. And we'll play with that a little more to fill it out. But that's just kind of what I'm thinking for now. Again, it's still a lot of just putting down colors, but I'm keeping in mind a little more what might be useful now that we have the start of some sort of scene happening. And get some nice contrast here. So you'll notice there's a very sharp contrast of this teal against this pale yellow. And then we can just pull that out. And again, I'm using this brush with the long and short bristles. And now all of this that's here, I can turn into like coral or perhaps some fish. It's just kind of whatever the shapes want to be from here now that something is taking shape beyond just abstraction. And if you're doing this and you just prefer the straight abstraction without any sort of, you know, discernible shapes or objects, just do that then. There's no need to, I guess, follow where I go if you don't feel like it. Like, definitely, you know, it's for you, so play how you would like to play. Another fun thing you can do if you have a wide angle brush like this, and you're going to want a decent amount of paint, and I'm using matte medium with it to kind of, it waters it down in the sense that it makes it a little more liquidy and more soft to work with, but it still keeps the pigment and the texture of the paint. So what you can do is, if you have it straight down, go and then press some and lift up, and then press down and lift up, press down, lift up, and you get these fun ribbons, which work very well for, you know, a jellyfish kind of style. If I go just along the edge there, because both paints are wet, they'll bleed a little bit at the edges together, which is a nice way to make the, I guess, tentacles that I'm doing here seem cohesive, like it's part of the same tentacle, but that it is catching light in a certain way, or that it's creating shadow. So it gives it a little bit of visual dimension. So now I'm using just a normal kind of standard point round brush. And if you need a little, you know, inspiration, if you get to a point where you're like, oh, this looks like undersea, you know, feel free to look up pictures of coral or underwater fish or whatever. You know, if you want a visual reference or reminder of what, you know, what you kind of might be going for, you can absolutely do that. It's not like cheating or anything. This is all about you doing what you want to do and enjoying it. And if you know, want to try a new thing, go for it. So what I'm doing here, I have some of this white, but it's very, very watery. And because of that, if there's little places where it still touches this black that is still wet, you'll notice it picks up, it's hopefully, this light is very inconvenient. I'll hold this up here. You can see how they're blending together because that white, because the white is so wet. But it gives you some fun drips and some fun color blending there too, where you're just letting the paint do whatever it feels like doing a little bit. You'll get some fun surprises when you let the paint just kind of be its own thing. So as I'm filling in the tentacles here, I'm actually wanting to keep a fair amount of implied line or implied form. So it's kind of like if you've ever done hair, you don't draw every strand of hair, you kind of draw like parts. So like this part here, you know, and then have it fill in more somewhere else to give that impression of all of those various hairs, because you can't really draw in something like that to fully capture the reality. You have to do sort of an implied reality, and that's what we're also playing with here. So I really like some of these long bits in the background that aren't necessarily tentacle shape or anything, but they do have that line to them. And so I want to keep that, because that's part of what made me kind of see this as a jellyfish form to begin with. And so I don't want to remove or hide all of those original kind of reminders of the form. So I'm keeping one side of it kind of light and the other side kind of dark. By doing that, I'm giving an implied light source. And so you feel like there is some sort of light coming from the surface of the water or from that direction. I'm sorry, the contrast of that light is really hard there. I know that makes it a little tricky to see what I'm doing, so thank you for your patience with that. There we go. So this paint that I'm using now, it's this high flow acrylic, and it's very, very liquidy, but I like to use it with this very long bristle brush, and it's very fun because it will give you these very clean lines. Like if you try a softer body paint or a very hard body paint, you'll notice you'll notice the brush doesn't hold on to the paint as long because you'll get these kind of choppy brush strokes where the brush will kind of dry up or not have as much saturation of the paint. And so when you're working with a very, very liquidy paint, the bristles maintain a consistent saturation, I guess, better. And so it's very, very fun because you can do just very long, you know, just long, fun lines. That's the word, lines. Okay, so I'm gonna let this bit over here dry some more before we get in there and kind of finish filling that out. So I'm gonna work over here, and then we're gonna get pretty close to, I think, being done once, which is fun. What I'm doing here, some of this is still wet, so I'm actually just picking up gently in a circular motion, kind of picking up some of the paint. So what that's doing is picking up just the dry bit, but it's allowing some of that previous color to come through. But again, it's giving it a much more textured appearance because you have all those layers and color variation of other paint on it. So you'll notice that I am not concerned too much about keeping this line here particularly clean between the background and what I've decided is my jellyfish form. If you want to keep that line cleaner, go for it. You know, I enjoy that sort of shift between foreground and background and those sort of boundaries changing depending where you put your perspective or where you put your focus. But just because that's my preference doesn't mean it's yours. And I think that if you like it a different way, by all means, you know, do it how you like to do it. So all I'm doing here is implied shapes, because inevitably, if you sort of have something that's kind of dark on the bottom and allow it to mix with the background as it comes up, you know, you're making an implied depth. You're making something that looks like it has a top and a bottom, or a foreground and a background. You know, things in the front are brighter, they're more detailed, and they're bigger. As you go back, in this case it would get darker because there's no light source back there, but it would get dimmer or more gray or more neutral colored, smaller, and then less detailed. So if you're trying to make something with depth, you can play off that pretty easily with fairly simple shapes. And then what we can do is make just kind of some shapes there. And then go up a bit more line to them. Yeah, I like that better. And then even this you can take up. And now what I'm doing by pressing it like this, it just blends it a little differently than just a straight. So if I just rub it like this, you'll get these kind of marks. When you press like this, you get a more I don't know what to call it. You get a different texture. I don't. Speckle is the best word I can think of, but that doesn't feel quite right. So it just gives you another textural option, basically. Okay, so then we let that side dry. Come back and play over here a little more. I have this gold iridescent, which I've started to really enjoy over the last few years. There's a number of these. And they add an interesting component, especially in real life. It's hard to see over video, I'm sure. But especially if it's over dark, like a black or a navy, it has this iridescence to it. And so at certain angles or certain light, you see different shades. So it can be like a gold to sort of a green. And there's a number of different iridescents too, where it could be a violent iridescent or orange, blue, reddish. And so they're very, very fun to just kind of explore as well. So what I'm doing here is just trying to add a little more jellyfishness to the form here. And then I'm using this gold as well to give it a bit of an iridescence as a jellyfish. But again, I'm not fully coloring the whole thing in. I'm leaving parts to show that background because, again, that background is what it kind of inspired the form to begin with, and so I don't want to fully take that away. And then I'm just adding in more matte medium because that helps blend and spread my colors around as well. Actually, I think I'm going to bring this guy down like that. The main thing to consider when you're sort of developing out your final shapes or your sort of last figures is just keeping in mind where your contrast is, keeping in mind how people will know, oh, this shape is separate from the background. And there's no particular right way to do that. In fact, if you want them to be very subtle and so there isn't a huge contrast, that's completely fine as well. The only thing is if you're struggling or getting frustrated because something isn't showing up the way you'd like, one thing I suggest is just stepping away for a little bit because while frustration is certainly a normal response,
it's not enjoyable, and you don't need to feel frustrated. So, you know, just take a step back for a little bit, take a breath, and remember why you enjoy it, and then come back and remember there's no wrong way. But also, it could just be that something isn't getting emphasized in the way you like, or that something isn't clear in a way that you're hoping that you would like it to be clear. So sometimes just stepping back and just, you know, grabbing some tea or a cup of coffee and relaxing and just looking at it for a little bit. I often hang my art in my living room above the television. And sometimes I just, you know, in the middle of a piece, take time to just really look at it and look at it from different angles. And, you know, especially if I haven't found anything in it yet, just kind of continue turning it to see what comes out. And what I'm doing now, I don't think this is actually any part of a jellyfish. I'm just playing with designs again because it's abstract and they're fun. And I like these little subtle details in my work. I think they give interesting bits to kind of draw the eye in. And that happens to me all the time. It's not a big deal. If you drop a little daub of paint somewhere, you know, you can leave it, you can blend it in, you can wait till it dries and paint over it. It's never a big deal. So this is just that long bristle brush again, but flat, and then just kind of moving it that way. And that will also create an interesting texture option there. So you'll notice just from playing a lot of fun ways that you can use brushes that aren't necessarily the immediate way that you would initially kind of think to use it. I have these fun things that do dots. However, you can always just use the end of a brush as well. But if you're somebody who ends up wanting to do a lot of dot work, like mandalas and stuff, these are fun and probably worth investing in because it will be easier to use, maintain, and clean than using the brush ends or the tip ends of brushes. But especially if you're just kind of playing and you don't really know if this is something you'd want to invest money in, the end of your brush will work perfectly well. All right. So from here, if you wanted to, you could keep filling it out. You could add more tentacles. You could play with the detail here, making it less detailed as you go back. You know, if you wanted to, you could just do a cool design in the background, make it, you know, your own thing. You could add some patterning over it. There's all sorts of ways that you could play with it from here if you wanted to keep going. We are done. So I hope you enjoyed figuring out what this painting was with me. And I know I certainly enjoyed sharing this process with you. Take care, be kind to yourself. Goodbye.